Hey everyone, over the past year and a half, the smartphone mid-range has become incredibly competitive. Flagship features have been brought down to more affordable phones, and Chinese manufacturers like Xiaomi have been hitting hard. In 2018, however, Samsung sort of missed the mark, and now they're trying to up their mid-range game with their newest A series. However, the €400 or $400, depending on where you live, price segment is incredibly competitive. So what does the A70 offer you for the money? I'm Angie for GSM Arena, and this is our Samsung Galaxy A70 review. The Galaxy A70 is not a small phone. However, it's surprisingly thin for how large it is. The bezels are thin all around, although the bottom one is thicker than the rest. The notch is small, and in contrast with the large screen, you barely notice it. The plastic back, which Samsung calls glastic, has a rainbow gradient when it catches the light. It looks a little like the colors you'll see from oil spilled on wet asphalt. There's also the main triple camera setup. Thankfully, the cameras don't stick out very much, so the phone doesn't wobble when it's on a desk. The buttons are nice and clicky, and they're placed in a more intuitive position than the S10 series. However, the phone is still pretty wide, and while One UI helps a lot, it's not the easiest to use one-handed. The Galaxy A70 collects fingerprints pretty easily, but while they're noticeable, the phone doesn't turn into an oil slick. It tends to be a little slippery, but it's not like a bar of soap, unlike some phones. Still, I'd be pretty careful with it, especially around water, because it has even less IP protection than the original Galaxy A series. As far as biometrics are concerned, there's a face unlock option and an optical fingerprint reader. If you get used to where it is, you can even unlock your phone without needing to turn on the display. Speaking of, the 6.7-inch AMOLED is the biggest selling point of the Galaxy A70, both figuratively and literally. This is the biggest OLED screen you'll find in the mid-range Galaxy lineup, and even one of the biggest in Samsung's lineup, aside from the S10 Plus 5G. Yeah, it's not Quad HD like the S10, but it's a really good display. It's decently color accurate in vivid mode and is pretty much spot on in normal mode. Brightness gets up to 407 nits if you bring it up manually, and if you're in auto mode, it gets up to 607. So sunlight legibility is great too. In short, media consumption is really good on this device. There's a headphone jack on the bottom, and sound isn't bad, but it's not earning any bonus points either. In some markets, there's also NFC for easier Bluetooth connectivity if your headphones aren't wired, and for things like Samsung Pay. There's a tiny earpiece above the notch, but it's not used for anything except for calls, so there's no stereo speaker setup. Instead, there's a single downward-firing speaker. It has above-average loudness, but isn't particularly rich in terms of sound quality. It's alright for the price range, however. Despite being really thin, the A70 is packing a beefy 4,500 mAh battery. Unsurprisingly, it got an impressive 103 hours on our battery life tests. It also includes faster charging than the A50 with its 25-watt charger. Mind you, this is faster than the S10 too, and you can get from 0 to 42% in 30 minutes of charging. Performance-wise, the Galaxy A70 performed well. It was about 25% faster in tasks that required the CPU than the A50. However, the A50 was about 10% faster with graphics performance. This is pretty insignificant in day-to-day usage and for most use cases, but it's interesting to note and it definitely surprised us. The A70 sports Android Pie with their newest One UI on top. In classic Samsung style, it's still packed full of customizations and features. However, it's a huge improvement to previous generations because everything is much cleaner, easier to find, and perhaps most importantly, much easier to reach with just your thumb. This is also why the icons are so much larger too. Samsung also has their own gestures, which work fine, but honestly aren't the most intuitive ones we've used. Other than that, you'll still find an always-on display with plenty of options, a digital well-being submenu that shows you how much you use your phone, and 3 power modes that give you a lot of control over your power consumption. The A70's triple camera setup features a 32-megapixel main sensor, an 8-megapixel ultra-wide lens, and a depth sensor. Sadly, none of them have OIS. By default, the phone shoots in 12 megapixels, but you can go into settings and change it to 32 instead. However, in high-res mode, there's no HDR, and unfortunately it takes a second or two longer to get your shot. In the high-res mode, daylight shots aren't bad. However, detail levels aren't what you'd expect from 32 megapixels. Photos are a bit soft, despite software sharpening, and though this worked for things like grass, you can notice sharpening halos in a couple of places. Still, the colors are quite accurate, there's good contrast, and despite the lack of HDR, dynamic range is good too. In the default mode, images are good, but detail and sharpness aren't the most impressive we've seen on a mid-ranger. Colors and contrast are quite good, and the dynamic range is simply excellent. The ultra-wide lens produces heavily distorted images. Still, it fits a lot in the frame, so it's a small price to pay. Colors and contrast are excellent, and the dynamic range is improved by the Auto HDR. In low light, the 32-megapixel photos are pretty bad, so we'll just stick with the default mode. However, it still has poor levels of detail. Without HDR, the low-light photos tend to be overexposed. HDR fixes that, but introduces a few issues of its own, among which is uneven sharpness or extra softness, possibly due to the imperfect photo stacking. In good light, portraits are impressive, with no abrupt transitions in the background separation. They're not always perfect, but even flagships make blunders sometimes. The front camera is also a 32-megapixel one, and it too shoots 12-megapixel photos by default. Images are very detailed and have excellent colors. Selfie portraits are generally pretty good too, but the phone really struggled with my hair. The Galaxy A70 can record 4K videos at 30 FPS. They're nicely detailed and have excellent contrast and dynamic range. Colors are accurate too, but sadly there's no electronic stabilization. In Full HD, footage is great too. Clips are highly detailed, sharp, and with little noise. Naturally, colors and dynamic range are as good as in 4K. The A70 is a really good all-around phone. That extra-large AMOLED is a rarity, and it makes it pretty easy to recommend. However, if you don't need that bigger screen and you don't need that extra bit of battery life, then I'd actually go with the Galaxy A50. For $90 less, you get pretty much the same camera performance, the same UI, and pretty much the same speed, especially if you get the version with 6 gigs of RAM. Also, if you're more interested in photography and videography, I'd skip both of these phones, pay $50 more, and go with the Pixel 3a. Still, it all depends on what you need the most, and all in all, the Galaxy A70 is one of the best mid-rangers around. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button down below, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and I'll see you next time.